Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools, and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, well-being, and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal well-being. Welcome to the 217th episode of the award-winning Diverse Minds podcast, and it's Black History Month, a momentous occasion to recognise and celebrate the invaluable contributions of Black people to British society. Black people have always been at the forefront of social justice movements, fighting against oppression and paving the way for change. However, despite their countless contributions to society, the achievements of Black women in particular have too often been overlooked or forgotten. That's why this year the theme for Black History Month is celebrating the exceptional achievements of Black women, with the theme saluting our sisters. It highlights the crucial role that Black women have played in shaping history, inspiring change, and building communities. This year's celebration showcases pioneering Black women who have made remarkable contributions to literature, music, fashion, sport, business, politics, academia, social and healthcare, and more. And on that note, today I am speaking with Jimi Okubanjo. The team at Follow Jimi Worldwide, which is led by Jimi Okubanjo, an experienced ex-corporate executive and operational excellence expert with over 22 years of experience in operations and management consulting, particularly focused in the engineering sector. Jimi has successfully led operational transformations across multiple industries and has generated over $250 million in performance improvements. She's also worked in energy, mining, infrastructure, and financial services, and her extensive experience equips her with a deep understanding of leading successful transformations in various industries. She has a new film. Her film, A Rising Firebird, tells the stories of seasoned professional women of color who left the workplace due to toxic sexism and racism, and how they are rebuilding their lives, careers on their own terms. She's on a mission to get the message of A Rising Firebird to over 1 million women of color, plus any allies, to help overcome toxic work and build their careers and lives on their own terms. So needless to say, I'm hugely excited to have this conversation. So Jimi, a huge welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Alayla. I'm really excited about being here.
And we're really excited to have you. And so I've read out your bio, but I think it would be really great for listeners to know what you're working on at the moment.
So I am just, we're in the final stages of producing a documentary feature-length film called A Rise Firebird. And it tells the stories of seasoned professional women of color who exited the workplace for various of not so exciting reasons. And we're currently working with helping technical leaders, specifically more of those in engineering, helping them have difficult conversations, starting with discrimination, starting with exclusion, but really with a view of helping them feel safe enough to talk about that so they can also be better equipped to have difficult conversations beyond that, whether it's on cultural issues, mental health, mental well-being, but even into spaces like technical risk management, non-technical risk management, health and safety, operational transformation, and really the plethora of really powerful but sometimes hard conversations that leaders need to have.
And this is such needed work. It's needed, and I want to acknowledge that, but I also want to acknowledge that all of us that work in this space, ideally, we don't want to have these jobs because we shouldn't need to have these conversations, because in an ideal utopian world, there should be space and equity for everyone.
I think that one of the great things of being a filmmaker is there'll always be stories to be told, even positive, inspirational stories. And I think that in an ideal world, there'd be, from a film standpoint, even more stories to be told. And I think, yes, in an ideal world, leaders won't struggle with conversations, even around like performance management and risk management. Yeah, that is definitely true. But then again, there may not be any need for engineers in the ideal world because we'll have everything built. You won't need bridges or roads or to send people to space because you just, I guess, be able to go there.
Brilliant. Yeah. And so how did you become someone who equips leaders to hold these important yet what's perceived as difficult conversations? What was your journey to this work?
So there's probably my technical journey and the emotional journey. So that my background for over 20 years, Layla, I've worked in operational excellence. That's basically helping organizations actually run and do whatever it is they're being paid to do that better. And I worked largely in very heavy industrial sector, so energy, nuclear power, mining, infrastructures, like really infrastructure level construction, so roads and train tracks, just really complicated, heavy work like that. And so my job has been to come in when they're trying to really improve what they're doing, deliver their projects safely, more efficiently, at a lower cost, on time, correctly, and to figure out why they may be struggling in that space. And what I found doing that for several decades is that even with technical change, leaders were not able to have certain types of conversations with other technical leaders, financial leaders, people leaders to unblock major issues. There was incredible impasse on issues, and dare I say, a lot of emotion tied to that, even though engineers aren't supposed to feel emotions. There's a lot of emotion tied to that, and they couldn't move past agreeing on the ways of working. There's a massive assumption. At a leader at this stage, you should just know X. You should just follow this process. You should just do Y. And coming in with that really strong position that, if you're telling me this, you mean I don't know how to do my job. And so I can't hear you, because if I admit you have anything to contribute, that means I don't know how to do my job. And that's in the technical space. So my job was really, apart from the technical solution rollout, was really getting the senior leaders to begin to have those kind of conversations with senior managers. No, Timothy, we're not rolling out a new integrated activity planning system or process because you're a bad manager or a bad person. But we do need to still improve the way we're working. And those were very difficult conversations that we coach leaders to have with senior technical leaders. So that's where that understanding, that realization of the significance was. But when I made the film Arise Firebird, that came from just my own personal experience. I had some really, 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 really difficult experiences in my workplace. Especially, I would say the last few years were incredibly terrible, but it had been terrible I endured 20 plus years of it thinking it'll get better someday. And it didn't. And so that's why I took some time. I really needed to take some time. I was not in the greatest spaces emotionally to kind of figure out what I do next. And that was why I said, okay, I'm going to take a break from management consulting and the technical side of how are we going to improve a subsea, how are we going to improve the deployment of a new subsea project or new water injection system. I'm going to just take a break from that and figure out what I want to do. And through that process of reflection, I thought I'll make a movie. Why not? It's something, it seems hard, and I like doing hard things. And it was harder than I ever imagined. I definitely wouldn't recommend someone going through the kind of emotional turmoil I was going through to jump on doing a feature-length film as a solution. But that was where I made the documentary, and it was difficult for a lot of us who contributed to the film. And as we began to take this documentary into organizations, I also began to notice how it kept coming up. The senior leaders really struggled not sitting through it, wanting to sit through it. Those that sat through it found out that they didn't spontaneously combust, and they were able to walk away with greater empathy and a better appreciation of, okay, we need to do something now. But what we found is that there was a lot of concern leading up to it. And so we found that nobody seemed to be comfortable having that conversation. So a leader themselves will be happy with the film, but then how do I talk to somebody else, a peer, a colleague, a subordinate? And that became really important for me, because I do recognize and recollect, and allegedly, I tend to remember that most technical leaders were people. I can't guarantee they all were, but I think there were at least a few of them. A few of them were humans, and humans are emotional, and it's not a bad thing. It's just it is what it is, and so we often hide fear through inaction. And so what we're doing with the movie, particularly with engineering technical leaders, senior leaders, is we're using this film now to help them get help them feel safe to start this conversation with their senior managers, and hopefully get the senior managers to feel safe starting this conversation with their middle managers and to cascade that down. But it came really just from discovering that we could definitely provide some support, because it's not because they're bad people. I mean, taking away any judgment on this issue, Leila, even asking a senior technical leader to lead a discussion of technical change, it is difficult. And an example, a few years ago, we were working again with an operated asset. They were generating $10 million of value a day. And they had a engineering department that sat in a different structure. Think of the matrix. They were in a different part of the matrix. So they didn't report into this operating asset, but they were responsible for very complicated, extraordinary maintenance, extraordinary repairs. What we had to help the engineering team understand is that they couldn't, even though they understood technically much more about how the asset was run, because many of them designed the asset, and many of them are global subject matter experts on this asset, and many of them think of like a power plant. Many of them had won awards based on the designs they had done, and they understood this asset really well. The operations team who ran the asset had to be the ones who made the final decision of what kind of maintenance work and upgrades were done. And it's difficult, but we understand I'm an award-winning engineer, in some cases scientist, and the technician, while lovely, or the operations engineers are not really engineers, they're just going to be senior technicians. In terms of skill level, I'm holding my hands up at two different levels, for those who can't see psychically. How do you, as a executive vice president or senior director of engineering, pitch that to your senior scientists that they're going to have to take direction from someone who probably has 10% of their skill set? Because that operated asset maintenance manager, technician, is the one who's ultimately going to be responsible for the output of that asset on a daily basis. They are also the ones, they also have to integrate all the other engineering disciplines to decide what's done first. They're also the ones they're the ones who have the money. They're the ones who have to manage the client, the community relations. They're the ones that have to keep the people working there safe. So if someone gets injured, it's the operations team leader that will go to prison, not the engineering team. But those aren't necessarily considerations you maybe necessarily need to consider when deciding whether or not an upgrade is needed in that moment. It was a very difficult conversation, and I actually had to, and this is the all technical conversation, right? We're not talking about diversity, inclusion, or equity. And there are several situations I had to be in the meetings to help the senior leader broach that conversation with his direct reports. Because many of them, they want to win awards, they want to write papers, they want to contribute to the cutting edge of engineering, because they know that will help humanity on a much greater level. And they want to feel they're being valued, and they don't want to feel like they're being talked down to. So this was a difficult conversation. It took months of really wrestling with this and supporting the senior leader in being able to have that conversation, because understand, he's going to talk to his chief engineers and chief scientists. They have to go and talk down to the scientists who actually initiate the work. And so this was the piece that we supported them on. So I say this in the sense that when I now come into this space and look at cultural transformations, inclusion, equity, diversity being a very important one, I often don't see as much support to the leaders working through their own concerns and discomfort and their concern about kind of backlash and pushback from their own teams. There's almost an assumption, sometimes, not always, but sometimes the assumption they should just get it because of the seniority of their role. And if a senior, rotating equipment technical authority does not feel that they can talk to other rotating equipment engineers about an area in which they're writing papers on, then I could imagine how that technical authority would feel having to now speak to those same rotating engineers about something they feel even less confident or capable of talking about.
Yeah, I think your point about fear is often hidden in action is a really, really poignant one, because we see that all the time. And also this idea that, if you say you don't know something, you're stupid. You see it in academia, having worked at Imperial, and I loved working with engineers, but they just want to solve, and there's often no sitting in the moment because there's such a need to solve. So that's super helpful. And going back to your film Arise Firebird, can you tell us a little bit more about, without spoiling anything, what the aim is, who you want to see it, and what the kind of hope is, by making that film? What was your hope?
I didn't really have a big plan. Again, for me, it was a space of, I love you talked about like sitting in the. I really, going into making a Rise Firebird, I was probably crying a lot. I was still in that space of crying a lot, in the space of really feeling I wasn't competent to do anything. So when I left, when I took the break from the workplace, I left with three things I knew for sure. And this was just from again decades of my career. This isn't really down to any one particular person, but I left knowing that I was human garbage. I had a life that was not worth living, and I was not competent or qualified to do anything. Those were the three things I knew for certain. So coming into Rise Firebird, I was like, coming into make a documentary, like this is just gonna be a new chance for me to learn. And I'm gonna treat this first film like I'm going to film school. I'm just gonna be open and get as much information and learn as much as I can with no expectation about what would happen, except for the hope that I would complete it. And I think as it progressed, and I remember especially after we finished the filming, the actual camera work. When we finished the actual camera work, I realized that, I do know how to run projects. I do know how to lead people. Just some of the things that have been used consistently, just all kinds of things. I mean, I've been told about my hair being wrong. So it's like, you sound too American, or I get like, you sound too much like on a Friday and it's like a Wednesday afternoon. Like, what does that even mean? It's like, so, but they're just things that were said, and this having a space helped me remember I am good at doing a lot of things, and I'm capable and competent. And that was probably a big part of the film, just the process, the project of running that very complicated project helped me kind of reconnect with myself professionally. My hope with the movie shifted. I definitely think and thought there's real value in the movie being a witness to what had happened. So at least those around me would stop asking me to kind of relive everything, and because they weren't sure that, maybe something you said kind of, maybe you kind of asked for it. You could have asked to be threatened and intimidated and chased on the street and called the N-word. Maybe you asked for that somehow. So just watch the movie, and then it's even a TED Talk now, and then you can answer those questions without having me to say, this is why I didn't do that. I think as it progressed, I feel there's definitely value in people who've gone through this or going through this or love someone who's going through this to know they're not alone. So in terms of wider, and eventually the film will be more widely released. We're aiming 2025, 2026 is quite a bit for it to be widely released. But the real big thing for me, Lila, is really with leadership. I mean, one, because that's my career has largely been working in those spaces. Technical leadership, especially, because leaders set the culture and leaders set the tone. And when we did a screening event with Harvard, we did an event with the Women Association for Women in Science. And the questions often come up in terms of what can companies do to make a better environment? What can I, as a person who's gone through this, do to make a better environment? And ultimately, for an individual, really it's going to talk about harm reduction strategies, which are still great, but harm reduction strategy isn't resolving the underlying issue. And there's plenty of material out there about harm reduction strategies. And we even have like a return to work 6-point plan that for anyone who's going through that to follow. But ultimately, the real heavy lifting, the real work is done by leadership. And we all know this, but we hope with the film, just by getting more leaders to watch the movie and then have a discussion amongst themselves, we do think it will help build empathy. And with empathy, you don't need a 45 plan implementation project, because you can bake that empathy into the work they're currently doing. So our hope with the film is that we can use this to help build leadership empathy, so they know how to pull for the right support from their DEI teams, HR teams, but also from their project teams. The senior leader, you're going to a project team, you've got 500 people. We're having a health and safety review. You're in that space. With greater empathy, you'll know that the people of color aren't talking, and we need their input from the health and safety plan. So we can know, why are we not getting a wider range of inputs? Because we'll be safer if everybody brings that in. We can look for ways with greater empathy. We can encourage leaders to consider ways to bake in the conversation into what they're already doing, into their existing cultural and business transformation projects. That's what I'm hoping to really use the film for. So it's really about underpinning ongoing initiatives, whether there are cultural change, diversity, equity, inclusion, mental health, mental well-being, but also to really help them look at how they can help this underpin their business, their operational. I say business, I mean, operational improvement projects as well, because there's always going to be the overlap.
Yeah, so that, yeah, I really, I again, I just so resonate, and I'm not trying to take over or claim your story as mine, but having to constantly explain things. I think that's brilliant to hear different perspectives, because we know there isn't one Black experience. And also the point about systemic change without really ramming it down people's throats with data. And the way you described how you were feeling when you left the job before you started the film project, clearly that's not feeling mentally optimum or mentally particularly well. And I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, and I'm not trying to diagnose you, but thinking about work that makes people, particularly women of color, mentally unwell, what do you think the biggest challenges are in accessing support to come out of that?
I think for women of color, for anyone going through toxic work, I mean, so I think back to the TED Talk, we talk about, believe, act, believe, listen, believe, and act. I think that one of the things that one of the big challenges is when we go to people for support, I wasn't believed. I really wasn't believed, even by people in my own network, even by other Black women, even by other women of color and men, and my ministers. The view of, it can't be that bad, or you should be grateful, or are you sure? Are you sure? Were you even there when that guy said that thing to you? Were you there when he said it to you? Maybe you were somewhere else when he said that to you. But no, I was the only person there. Like you weren't there. I think I was there when that happened. So of course, believing is important. And people say, well, we need context. If we don't ask these questions, we're not going to fully believe. And so I'm a survivor of sexual assault, and I don't get asked as much for people to have me convince them it happened. I mean, there are people who aren't convinced. That is true. But I've not been in a work situation where I've talked about it and they say, well, I'm sure. I tend to be believed. And I think so I'd say that we do need to believe. I think we need to support people by listening and not saying, well, you know what? I know exactly what it's like, what you're going through, Jimmy. You see, when I went to Florida on vacation, they lost my bags. So I know what it's like to be yes, exactly. And then they called me, a Brit. And that moment I knew, because it took them 25 whole minutes to get my bags, what exactly your 45 years of experience has been. Yes. Now I understand. So she can shut up. I allied, take out their cape and put on their ally cape I don't know. So I think we have to listen and we have to really hold space. And the bigger thing is to take action. And that's harder because we're going to make mistakes. So we have to make mistakes. One of the things that helped move me out of what I went through was honestly the person I least expected. I least expected this. And so in some ways the kudos to the profession, but honestly, I least expected it. It was my GP. I know, my doctor, my general practitioner in the UK. I kid you not. Because I was calling for some migraine medication when all this was getting really bad. And I started to cry on the phone. And he was like, I don't think you can go back to work. And I'm like, they won't let me not go back to work. And And I began telling him what was going on at work and how I was being treated and how bad it was. And he said, I don't think you can go back. And it was when hearing someone else say what I just thought was my fault. It was the first time someone affirmed that, and that was a GP. And he called back a week later to make sure I was doing okay, and if I was agree to take some time off. So I say this because he took a risk calling out what he saw. I was not prepared to, even as bad as it was, to not do something, to do something. It took someone else saying that in my situation. And in the film, you hear about the points in which, in some of the cases, it was somebody else that was able to have a difficult conversation with someone they loved that got them to admit that there was a problem that was going on. And understand, I was having heart palpitations, severe chest pain. I was constantly living in that level of pain, thinking I was having a heart attack. I'm going to give a bit of a woman moment. I would have my time of the month for weeks in terms of the level of stress I was under. And I was still going back. And it did take somebody outside of me saying, listen, this does not seem like a safe environment for you to go back to. So I would say that for us, I think the big thing what I would say for someone is, if you're seeing someone who's going through that, even if it looks like they're coping, that's not how trauma works. Trauma affects our brains. It affects our mind, our body, and our behavior. Often the response is, and this came from the Rise Firebird, everyone was to double down and work harder in the face of abuse. So this is really for loved ones, for those who care about us, friends. It may take you taking that risk and having a conversation and saying, listen, I don't think you're coping with this. And I think, what is actually going on? Difficult conversation, conversation.
But I think it's so true, because I think when you're so in it and you're so unwell, you're terrified and you think, I've just got to get through this bit. I've just got to get through this bit. And by the time you've done that, you've hit burnout and crisis point. And if no one has that, if no one flags it to you, and they may have to do it 3, 4, 5 times and just say, I want to come with you. Like, should we just go speak to someone? And it is tricky, but it is possible. I think that's so true. Just when you were saying, our reaction is to double down and work harder, I was laughing not because it's funny. I was laughing because I was like, yep.
It's funny though. It's like, yeah, you got a bullet wound in your leg and an arrow in your head. Yeah, if I can
this is one email. Just one email. Yeah.
And something I would say that I would encourage leaders maybe not to do is maybe not to say, if you're struggling, say something, because that puts even more pressure on the victim. And I'll be fair, it's victim shaming. It's not the intention, because you're like, well, just tell me, I'll do something. That is a form of victim shaming, I think, anyway. What I would suggest is the conversation needs to go to leaders, like to the managers and to the colleagues. If you see someone who is struggling, say something. That's what I would suggest, because for someone who, we don't know how unwell someone is, and just to give a context, there are people alive today that are getting electroshock therapy because, for various reasons, it is believed to provide some value. They're under the care of psychiatrists. It's not, you don't just go on the street and you get it. You don't know if the person next to you, what kind of support they're actually getting, because it's not something that they particularly would want to advertise. So to ask somebody who is, I think to ask someone who may be going through something very severe and may not be getting that, maybe they need something, that level of support, and they're not getting it, but they're just coming to work, and then they just may not be able to recognize for themselves. They need to get help. And so this is where leaders, managers, colleagues need to recognize that I think she might be struggling. I remember in one role, I actually was telling my leaders I was struggling. And in a meeting, I was publicly shamed for saying that we're all suffering here. It's a tough job. I remember her, I remember the senior executive That is what they said to me. And I took it in. And so I never said anything after that. So we have to understand that how do we not it's yes, people should say something if they're able to, but as leaders, we also have a duty of care. And this is why for us having that difficult conversation, that's a hard conversation. How do you now broach it with someone that you think could be at risk? As a leader, like who do you talk to about that? Did you say, hey, John, I think you're acting a bit, probably not. Everyone knows not to do, well, not everyone, I can't say that. Some people, that may be how they would approach it because, they're a funny person. There is humor. So I really do feel like we need to create more spaces for managers, senior leaders, people who manage people, not HR, but people who actually manage people to problem solve these kinds of things. Where do they go to get advice from? Is it their friend Bill, who takes it just as lightly? Is it the DEI leader who sits 5 levels below them, right? Is it their head of the CFO who's like, this is not my job? Where do they go? Where do especially most senior leaders go? So problem solve, like I'm seeing this and I'm concerned. Where? And that's what we're really hoping to do with our project is to create the spaces for leaders to be able to go back and say, I've seen this, I'm concerned. What do you think I should do? And have someone who's also on that journey to give them some meaningful advice and point them in the right direction. And it may be actually, we do need to have a mental health, a wellness person at our level who can field these kind of inquiries, who's more senior, who understands what we're trying to deal with. And asking for budget for that is a difficult conversation.
Mm. And don't forget, everyone, check out my ebook, The Mentally Healthy Leading Manager, which does touch on some of the things that Jimi has talked about. And I think that's the thing. Very insightful. I'd never thought of it as victim shaming, and I can totally see that. And I think that it's all very well saying talk to someone, but every time I have in my own family, actually less so in workplaces, but when I've tried to talk about things, I get shut down. So you're not then going to go to a workplace which feels very vulnerable with people who don't really look like you and start. Sometimes it can be easier, but you don't know which way it's going to go, and it feels terrifying. So I just think that I think it's very Eurocentric to say just talk, just do this, because you don't know the cultural frameworks people are operating in either. And I'm not trying to push together all Euro cultures either, but I think in the global north there is more of the thing around Instagram culture talking about it, and I think in global majority cultures and the global south it's diaspora, it's just not the same. And I think then encouraging people to find those words and having the systems where people can do that is much more important.
I would even with even beyond that, we know, for example, we know there is studies that suggest, and I have found men commit suicide at work at much higher rate. In this country, it's going to be largely white men. So there is a need, regardless of the culture, for us to be looking out for each other, because and for someone at that level, they probably need someone to reach out to them. So we do need to reach out. I also realize a lot of people, regardless of ethnicity and culture, have childhood trauma, have work trauma, have been victims of crime. We have people who are neurodiverse. So we have a lot of people. So if we just assume that because for some part of the population who will speak out, because maybe they don't have those factors and they've not faced acute abuse, we can't take an approach for basically the healthy and apply that to people who are not necessarily in the best spaces. Saying, well, you know what? You could also run 3 marathons too, and to raise awareness for workplace abuse. One could do that. That would also raise awareness, but we can't just say we're going to take what the healthiest person with the most access, with the most support, and we're going to use that to be the advice we give people. Mm-hmm. Because then basically we're finding people often aren't saying very much.
Yeah, absolutely. So on that point about mental health and well-being and the work that you do now, Jimi, how do you look after your own mental health? What are your top 3 tips that you'd like to share with listeners?
Oh, right. So I think of my 6 return to health things, but I think one is community And I mean that deliberately. I intentionally seek out people who could encourage me on my journey and who have been on a journey of their own. And I have people around me who honestly tell me amazing things. I have a lot of people who are happy to criticize. That's human nature. So I know people who walk down the street and say, Jimmy, your dog is ugly. I don't even know who you are. Your name's in your t-shirt. That's how I know your name. But that dog, it's an ugly dog. I just want you to know, good day. You have a lot of that. So I look for people who are much more positive, understand. I want to be clear. I know we talk about constructive feedback, the harsh truth, and tough love. I have got a lot of the constructive. I've got a lot of the constructive criticism. I've got all the criticism. I've got all the harshness. And I've got the toughness. So a part of my mental health is getting support from the more of the love, the love, the compassion, support, the cheerleading. And that's a big part because I'm probably my worst critic, my own worst critic. I probably think what I do is even worse than what it actually is. And I have so many voices of past employers, the ghosts of past employers past, rattling on in my brain. So that's a big part for me. I think, yes, I suspect for a lot of us, we are getting a disproportionate amount of negative feedback. Understanding it can take 4 to 5 pieces of positive feedback to counter 1 piece of negative feedback. And so we say, well, we'll give the positivity sandwich, 1 piece of negative feedback, positive, negative, positive. We know that formula. We know you're giving me something positive only to prepare for the 45 minutes of just assassination. So no, that positive feedback sandwich doesn't work. I think it's a ploy. I challenge someone to give just unrestrained positive feedback. I think they may start spitting out blood. Like, what? Just tell them what they're doing well for like 30 minutes and walk away. So there's a bit of, I think it's hard for a lot of us. So I have people in my life who can give me positive feedback. It doesn't mean I'm perfect, but it's really important for me to have that. That's one. So my community, a supportive encouragement community, inspiring, that inspires me and that I inspire them. A second thing for me is rest and taking the space and time away I need. So I'm the kind of person now that I would happily leave a group and have lunch on my own. It's not antisocial. I don't need to work my morning, have lunch with you and have work with you in the afternoon. Does it make you a bad person or me a bad person? I actually value my alone time. So hotel events, going away for work and having to spend time with clients, I'm very clear. I will spend my evening alone. You'll see me in the lounge. You'll see me doing stuff. That's time I need to spend with myself. And it's important for me to be happy and restored to just spend time with people that, just with myself or people I love or just with my own thoughts. And I feel it's okay. It's really, really okay to just take a break from people, every single day that I go to work, every single day. It makes me better. It makes me more. It makes them happier to see me when I come back, I guess. And if not, I'm happier. I think the final thing for me has been purpose, finding the purpose in what I do. I mean, I'm fortunate I get to do that with my day job. But even though I say that, there's still elements that are even more aligned to my purpose. So I do a lot of mentoring. Coaching, listening sessions for women of color, people of color who are struggling with work. I do that for free because it does help me. It helps me reconnect with why I'm doing what I'm doing. It helps me, when I go to I'm pitching to an executive and they're like, well, no, we don't have this problem in our company. We have that one Black woman, Tanika, her, about 10,000 people. Yes, she made assistant manager. So glass ceiling broke, smashed. You're lying, Jimmy. I still get calls like that. Being able to go back and being able to connect with my true purpose and remind myself this is why I'm doing it helps keep it in balance and helps also remember that what he's saying is, it helps me remember what he's saying isn't about me. So being able to connect to my higher purpose helps me not take things so personally. It still hurts. I still cry. I still cry sometimes from some of the calls I get. Mainly, from just why do I want to go back into engineering? I like to punish myself, I guess. But there are also great people in engineering. So why do I want to go back to engineering? Scratch that. Why do I want to go back to engineering? Because they're great people there. But sometimes people say things that are that are really upsetting, and having taken the space, taking the break, and also being able to make sure I'm really directly working with the people who are most impacted by this helps me.
Thank you so much, Jimmy. And of course, I will include the links on the show notes. But if people want to contact you and know more about your work, how should they do that?
The best way is check out our website, www.arisefirebird.com. And if you're interested we're doing a series of right now complimentary executive roundtables, and we're looking for organizations to co-host them with us. If you're interested in co-hosting and bringing some execs together to discuss difficult conversations, diversity, inclusion, equity, and beyond, they can also send us an email at hello@arisefirebird.com.
Thank you so much. What a brilliant episode. So please, people, if you enjoy it, do comment and share with your colleagues. And it's been a joy to have you, Jimmy. Thank you so much as part of our Celebrating Our Sisters series.
Thank you so much. It has been a pleasure to be here. I'm so honored.
Take care, everyone. Until next time. See you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.